The grand halls of Zifar Seven's diplomatic center were alive with voices from across the galaxy. Officials, warriors, and traders from different species moved through the massive structure, discussing politics, business, and alliances. Among them was Ethan Carter, a human diplomat and former soldier who had been invited as a guest of honor. Ethan walked through the crowd, his sharp eyes scanning the alien architecture. The ceilings were high, built for species taller than humans, and the walls were decorated with holographic symbols that shifted every few seconds. The entire place felt foreign, yet strangely familiar to him. He had been to many alien worlds, but Zifar 7 was different. This was a planet of warriors, and their culture was built on strength, honor, and tradition. As Ethan reached the central hall, a sudden hush fell over the crowd. He turned, following their gaze, and felt a strange chill run down his spine. A figure was approaching, tall, powerful, and unmistakable. Commander Velray. She was a Zifari warrior, standing over 7 feet tall, her skin a deep shade of violet. She wore a dark military uniform with golden armor pieces on her shoulders and forearms. Her piercing golden eyes locked onto Ethan, and for a moment, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Ethan hadn't seen her in years, not since the war they had fought together. Back then, she had been a fierce fighter, known for her ruthless efficiency in battle. But she had also been an ally, a comrade who had saved his life more than once. They had formed an unlikely bond during the chaos of war, but after it ended, they had gone their separate ways. Now she was here, standing before him with an unreadable expression. "Ethan Carter," Velray said, her voice strong yet calm. "It has been a long time." Ethan nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Didn't expect to see you here, Velray." Without another word, she stepped closer, and to Ethan's shock, she raised her hand and placed it firmly on his shoulder. The crowd reacted instantly. Whispers spread like wildfire, and many Zifari warriors looked stunned. Some even gasped in surprise. Ethan frowned. "What's going on?" Velray's golden eyes remained locked onto his. "I claim you as my prize." The room fell completely silent. Ethan blinked, confused. Did I hear that right? A human diplomat nearby cleared his throat awkwardly and whispered, "Ethan, I think she just declared ownership over you." Ethan's confusion turned to disbelief. "Wait, what?" He looked up at Velray, searching for any sign that this was some kind of joke. But her expression remained serious. "This is an honored tradition of my people," Velray explained. "In battle, when a warrior's life is saved, they may claim their savior as a prize, a companion who stands beside them for life." Ethan's mind raced. He had indeed saved Velray's life during the war. There had been a moment when she had been surrounded by enemies, her weapons damaged, and he had risked his own life to pull her out of the fight. But he had never imagined that act would have this kind of consequence. "Hold on," Ethan said, shaking his head. "I saved your life because it was the right thing to do. I didn't expect some kind of," he gestured vaguely, "prize situation." Velray's expression softened just slightly. "I understand. But this is our way. You have earned this place beside me. It is a sign of respect." The murmurs in the room grew louder. Some Zifari warriors looked impressed, while others seemed uncertain. The human diplomats nearby looked worried, probably calculating the political consequences of this strange event. A Zifari elder stepped forward, his aged features full of wisdom. "Commander Velray has invoked an ancient right. If the human accepts, he will be bound to her by honor and tradition." Ethan crossed his arms. "And if I refuse?" The elder's gaze darkened. "A refusal would be seen as an insult to our customs. It could damage relations between our people." Ethan clenched his jaw. Great, trapped by diplomacy. He glanced at Velray again. There was no arrogance in her expression, no sense that she was doing this to dominate him. If anything, she seemed conflicted, as if there was more to this than she was letting on. Taking a deep breath, Ethan sighed. Fine, I'll hear you out, Velray. But I'm not agreeing to anything until I understand exactly what's going on. Velray nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. Then follow me. As Ethan walked beside her, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something far bigger than he had realized. And he had no idea what awaited him next. Ethan followed Velray through the grand halls of Zephyr 7's diplomatic center. The murmurs of the crowd faded behind them, but he could still feel their eyes on him. He had faced dangerous situations before, hostile negotiations, ambushes, and even wars. But this was different. He had just been claimed as a prize. Velray led him through a towering doorway, where the sounds of the outside world became muffled. Inside, the room was vast yet simple. Stone walls, a large table in the center, and a few ornate weapons displayed along the walls. It was a warrior's chamber, not a diplomat's. She stopped near the table and turned to face him. You seem troubled. Ethan exhaled sharply. Troubled? Velray, I just got told I'm someone's prize in front of half the galaxy. What exactly does that mean? She studied him for a moment, her golden eyes calm but unreadable. Then she gestured toward a chair. Sit. He hesitated before finally pulling out a chair and sitting down. Velray remained standing, arms crossed, as if deciding where to begin. This tradition goes back thousands of years, she finally said. Among my people, a warrior's life is their own, until another proves themselves stronger or more honorable. When a life is saved in battle, the warrior has two choices. She held up one finger. First, they may swear a debt and spend years repaying it. Then she raised a second finger, or they may submit, offering themselves to the one who saved them as a sign of absolute trust and respect. Ethan frowned. And you chose the second option. Why? Velray's expression remained steady. Because you did not just save my life. Ethan, you changed it. He blinked. I don't understand. Velray walked over to one of the walls, her fingers trailing across the smooth stone. I was raised to believe that strength was everything, that only the powerful survived. And yet, when I faced death, it was you, a human, a species considered physically weaker, who pulled me from the abyss. She turned back to him. You risked everything, without expectation of reward. That act defied everything I was taught, and it forced me to question my own beliefs. Ethan leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. I saved you because it was the right thing to do, Velray. I didn't expect this. She nodded. I know. That is why I made my choice. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. Okay, but what does this actually mean for me? Am I supposed to be some kind of servant? A bodyguard? He hesitated, searching for the right word. Velray's lips twitched slightly. You are not my servant. Then what am I? She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. You are my equal. That caught him off guard. Your equal? But the elder said I'd be bound to you. Velray nodded. Yes, but not as a subordinate. This bond is a partnership, a warrior's oath. It means I will fight beside you, protect you, and stand with you against any enemy. She paused. And in return, you do the same for me. Ethan considered her words carefully. It sounded almost like an alliance, but with deeper cultural significance. So this isn't about control, he asked. She shook her head. No, it is about trust. Ethan exhaled slowly. This was still overwhelming, but at least it made more sense now. And if I refuse? Velray's expression grew serious. A refusal would be seen as an insult, not just to me, but to my people. It could damage relations between humans and Scifi. Ethan groaned. So I really don't have a choice, do I? She tilted her head slightly. You always have a choice, but there are consequences to every decision. Silence settled between them for a moment. Ethan could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Finally, he sighed. All right, I still don't fully understand this, but I'll go along with it for now. Velaray inclined her head. That is all I ask. A knock sounded at the door. One of Velaray's officers stepped inside, looking tense. Commander, the High Council has summoned you and the human. Velaray stood immediately. Ethan followed suit, already sensing that this wasn't going to be a simple meeting. What do they want? Ethan asked. The officer's expression darkened. There is opposition to your claim. Some believe a human is unworthy of such an honor. Ethan tensed. And what does that mean? Velaray's jaw tightened. It means you may have to fight for your place. Ethan stared at her. Great, he muttered. Just another normal day in alien diplomacy. Velaray smirked. Welcome to Zifar 7. Together, they stepped out of the room, heading toward whatever challenge awaited them next. Ethan walked beside Velaray through the towering halls of Zifar 7's High Council chamber. The air was thick with tension. He could feel the stares of Velaray's people, some curious, others hostile. The chamber doors loomed ahead, guarded by two Sci-Fi warriors clad in ornate armor. As they approached, one of the guards pounded his staff against the ground. The doors groaned open, revealing a grand circular hall filled with high-ranking officials, warriors, and elder advisors. At the center of the room stood a raised platform, where the High Council members sat. Ethan glanced at Velaray. I don't suppose they called us here to congratulate me. She gave him a small smirk. Unlikely. They stepped inside, and the murmurs grew louder. Ethan kept his posture relaxed, but his instincts told him this could turn dangerous. An elder Sci-Fi woman with silver markings on her dark blue skin raised her hand, silencing the room. Velaray of the Crimson Blades, you stand before the council, having made a claim unlike any before. Her piercing golden eyes shifted to Ethan. A human, as your chosen bondmate. The way she said it, Ethan could tell she wasn't pleased. Velaray placed a fist over her chest. High Councilor Drenna, the claim is valid. Ethan saved my life. By our ancient code, I exercise my right. Another counselor, a broad-shouldered Sci-Fi male, scoffed. A human cannot be worthy of such a claim. This is a warrior's tradition, not a place for soft-blooded creatures. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Soft-blooded. You clearly haven't met enough humans. A few murmurs of amusement spread through the chamber, but the counselor's glare remained cold. Drenna leaned forward. Tradition demands strength, honor, and loyalty. If a human truly wishes to be part of our warrior's oath, then let him prove it. Velaray's expression darkened. You are calling for a challenge. The broad-shouldered counselor smirked. A test. If he can stand against a Sci-Fi warrior, then he may keep his claim. Ethan sighed. Of course, there's a fight. Velaray turned to him, her voice low. You don't have to do this. I can protest. Ethan exhaled. He had been in enough situations to know when backing down was worse than fighting. He straightened his shoulders. I'll do it. The room filled with whispers, some surprised, others intrigued. Drenna nodded. Then let the trial begin. The arena. Ethan stood in the middle of the combat arena, a massive circular pit surrounded by towering stone walls. Above him, dozens of Zephyri gathered to watch, their voices echoing through the chamber. Across from him stood his opponent, a towering Sci-Fi warrior named Julik. His blue skin was marked with deep red battle scars, and he wielded a curved energy blade that hummed with power. Ethan, on the other hand, had been given a standard combat staff. No fancy energy weapons for him. Velaray stood at the edge of the arena. Julik is strong but slow. He will try to overpower you. Use speed. Ethan smirked. Got it. Don't get crushed. Drenna raised her hand. Begin. Julik wasted no time, charging forward with surprising speed for his size. Ethan barely dodged as the energy blade sliced through the air where he had been standing. Ethan rolled to the side, gripping the staff tightly. Julik swung again, but this time Ethan blocked, the impact sending a shock through his arms. The Sci-Fi warrior was strong. Ethan knew he couldn't match him in raw power. He needed to fight smart. Julik swung downward, and Ethan sidestepped, jabbing his staff into the warrior's ribs. The hit connected, but Julik barely reacted. Instead, he grabbed the staff and yanked Ethan forward. Ethan stumbled, barely avoiding a crushing elbow strike. He twisted out of Julik's grip and spun the staff, aiming for the warrior's leg. This time, his hit struck hard, and Julik staggered. The crowd murmured. A human was holding his own. Julik snarled and rushed again, but Ethan saw it coming. At the last second, he dropped low, sweeping the staff under Julik's legs. The big warrior lost his balance, crashing to the ground. Before Julik could recover, Ethan jumped forward, pressing the staff against the warrior's throat. Yield. The arena fell silent. Julik gritted his teeth but finally tapped the ground, a sign of surrender. Ethan stepped back, breathing hard. Drenna stood. It seems the human is not as weak as we thought. Velerai smirked. He never was. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. Can we skip the next fight? The counselor who had doubted him before remained silent. He wasn't happy, but he couldn't deny the result. Drenna nodded. The challenge is settled. The claim stands. Velerai walked over to Ethan, placing a hand on his shoulder. You have earned their respect. Ethan exhaled. Great. Now, can I get some water? The crowd laughed, and for the first time, Ethan felt like he had truly stepped into their world. Ethan sat on the stone bench outside the arena, catching his breath. His arms ached from the fight, and his clothes were covered in dust, but he had won. The Sci-Fi warriors who had doubted him now watched with quiet respect. Some even nodded at him as they passed. Velerai stood beside him, her expression unreadable. You did well, she said at last. Ethan smirked. Was that a compliment? She crossed her arms. A fact, but you should not have accepted the challenge so quickly. You could have been seriously injured. Ethan stretched his sore arms. If I backed down, they wouldn't have respected me. And besides, I had a great coach. Velerai's lips curled into a small smile. You learn quickly. Before Ethan could respond, a deep voice interrupted. Human. He looked up to see Julik, the Sci-Fi warrior he had just fought. The tall, battle-scarred alien stood with his arms crossed, but his golden eyes held no hatred, only curiosity. Ethan stood up, meeting his gaze. Julik. The warrior studied him for a moment, then placed a fist over his chest. You fought well. Ethan blinked. He hadn't expected that. He mimicked the gesture. So did you. You nearly crushed me. Julik smirked. I was careless. Next time, I will not make the same mistake. Velerai stepped forward. Is that a challenge, Julik? Julik chuckled. Not today. But the human has earned a warrior's respect. That is no small thing. He turned and walked away, leaving Ethan surprised. Velerai watched him go. You have done something rare, Ethan. You have earned an enemy's respect. Ethan exhaled. Good. Maybe now we can focus on more important things. Velerai's expression darkened. Yes, the council accepted the claim, but that does not mean we are safe. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Velerai glanced around before lowering her voice. There are those who do not trust humans. They believe you being here is a mistake. Ethan sighed. Let me guess, they won't challenge me in the arena. They'll try something else. She nodded. We must be ready. A sudden attack. That night, Ethan followed Velerai through the dark corridors of the warriors' barracks. The air smelled of metal and stone, the walls lined with banners from past battles. This will be your quarters, Velerai said, stopping in front of a door. It is close to mine, in case there is trouble. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Expecting trouble already, she didn't answer. Instead, she pressed a panel, and the door slid open. Inside was a simple room, metal walls, a single bed, and a weapon rack. It wasn't luxurious, but it was enough. Ethan stepped inside. Not bad. Could use a window, though. Valerai stayed at the doorway. Rest. You will need your strength. Ethan sat on the bed, stretching. Good night, Valerai. She nodded and left, the door sliding shut behind her. Ethan sighed, lying back. The bed was firmer than he was used to, but at least it was quiet. Or so he thought. Minutes later, he heard a soft sound, too soft for an ordinary person to notice. But Ethan had been in dangerous situations before. His instincts screamed at him. Someone was outside. He moved quickly, rolling off the bed without making the sound. The dim light from the door panel cast long shadows, but he could see movement. Then, bang! The door burst open, and a figure lunged inside. Ethan reacted instantly, grabbing the nearest object, a small metal plate from the table, and hurling it. It struck the attacker's arm, making them stumble. A second figure rushed in, wielding a blade. Ethan ducked, dodging the strike by inches. He grabbed the attacker's wrist and twisted, forcing the weapon out of their grip. The first attacker recovered and charged again, but Ethan was ready. He sidestepped, tripping them, and they crashed to the ground. Before they could get up, Valerai stormed in, her energy blade glowing red. She moved like lightning, striking both attackers before they could react. Within seconds, they were on the ground, unconscious. Ethan exhaled. Took you long enough. Valerai frowned. You are unharmed. Yeah, but I'd like to know who just tried to kill me. Valerai knelt beside one of the attackers, removing their mask. Underneath was a Sci-Fi male, his expression twisted with anger even in unconsciousness. She sighed. Loyalists. Ethan rubbed his temples. Loyal to who? Valerai stood. Not to me. A dangerous road ahead. The next morning, Ethan stood before the High Council again. The two captured attackers knelt before them, their hands bound. Drenna's face was grim. They acted against the will of the council. One of the attackers snarled. A human does not belong here. He weakens us. Valerai's voice was cold. He defeated one of our strongest warriors. How is that weakness? Drenna silenced the room with a sharp glare. Enough. The human has proven himself. But this attack shows there are those who would defy our decision. Ethan crossed his arms. So what happens now? The council spoke in hushed voices before Drenna turned back to him. The danger has not passed. There may be more who seek to remove you. Ethan sighed. Great. Valerai stepped forward. Then we prepare. We do not run. Drenna nodded. Very well. But be warned. This path will not be easy. Ethan glanced at Valerai and smirked. Easy would be boring. She smirked back. Then you will enjoy what comes next. The road ahead was dangerous, but Ethan wasn't backing down. Whatever was coming, he would face it, just like before. Ethan leaned against the stone wall of the training grounds, wiping sweat from his forehead. The early morning air was crisp, but his body burned from the intense drills Valerai had put him through. His muscles ached, but he wasn't complaining. If more attacks were coming, he had to be ready. Valerai stood nearby, her arms crossed as she observed him. You're improving. Ethan smirked. You sound surprised. She walked toward him, handing him a flask of water. Not surprised. Just cautious. The next fight won't be in the arena. It will be in the shadows. Ethan took a long sip. Yeah, I figured. The guys who attacked me weren't random thugs. They knew what they were doing. Valerai nodded. They were trained warriors, and that means someone powerful sent them. Ethan sighed, and let me guess, they won't stop until I'm out of the way. She looked at him with a serious expression. That or dead. Ethan clenched his fists. He had come to this planet trusting an old friend, but now he had to fight for his life just to stay. So what do we do? Valerai's eyes narrowed. We go to the source. The meeting with the elder. Later that day, Velrai led Ethan through the grand halls of the Sci-Fi capital. The massive stone pillars cast long shadows as sunlight filtered through narrow windows. They walked past armored guards, their gazes lingering on Ethan. He could feel their judgment, but he ignored it. He had more important things to worry about. At last, they arrived at a large chamber where an elderly Sci-Fi woman sat on an ornate throne. Her deep golden eyes studied Ethan carefully. Drenna, the High Council's elder, gestured for them to step forward. "You seek answers." Velrai bowed. "Yes, Elder Drenna. We must know who sent the attackers." Drenna sighed. "Many do not accept the presence of a human in our ranks. Some believe it is an insult to our traditions." Ethan crossed his arms. "I get that. But trying to kill me, that's not just about tradition." Drenna's eyes darkened. "No, it is not." She motioned to a guard, who handed her a data slate. She tapped the screen and turned it toward them. "We have identified the attackers. They were once loyal to General Krazier." Velrai stiffened. "Krazier?" Ethan frowned. "Who is that?" Drenna's voice was firm. "A former war hero, now a traitor. He believes our people must remain pure warriors, free from outside influence. He left the capital years ago, gathering followers who share his beliefs. We do not know where he is hiding, but we know this: he sees you as a threat." Ethan exhaled. "Great. Another guy who thinks humans are a problem." Velray's fists clenched. "We must find him before he strikes again." Drenna nodded. "Be careful. Krazier does not fight with honor. He fights to win." Ethan met Velray's gaze. "Then we better make sure he loses. Hunting the traitor." That night, Ethan and Velrai left the capital under cover of darkness. With the help of a trusted scout, they tracked Krazier's movements to an abandoned fortress deep in the mountains. The journey was long and dangerous, but Ethan never complained. If this Krazier wanted him gone, Ethan would face him head-on. After hours of trekking, they reached a rocky ridge overlooking the fortress. Hidden among the boulders, they observed the area below. Torches flickered along the stone walls, casting shadows over the heavily guarded entrance. Groups of warriors patrolled the grounds, their weapons glinting in the moonlight. Ethan whispered, "Looks like he's expecting company." Velray's eyes scanned the area. "We cannot fight them all. We need another way inside." Their scout, a quiet Zafari named Relic, pointed toward the far end of the fortress. "There is an old supply tunnel. It leads to the inner chambers." Ethan grinned. "That sounds promising." Velray nodded. "Then we move." The infiltration. Moving carefully, they made their way to the hidden tunnel entrance. The passage was narrow and damp, the air thick with dust. Ethan followed Velray's lead, stepping lightly to avoid making noise. After a few minutes, they reached a rusted metal gate. Velray pressed a control panel, and the lock clicked open. The door creaked slightly as she pushed it aside. Beyond the gate was a large chamber filled with weapons, armor, and stolen supplies. Ethan scanned the room, his eyes landing on a map spread across a wooden table. Velray stepped closer. "These are attack plans." Ethan frowned. "Attack plans for what?" A deep voice echoed from the shadows. "For the future of our people." They turned to see a tall Sci-Fi warrior emerging from the darkness. His armor was battle-worn, his eyes filled with determination. A scar ran down his cheek, marking years of combat experience. Velray's expression hardened. "Krazier." The former general smirked. "You should not have come here, Velray." "And you." He turned to Ethan, his eyes filled with disgust. "You should not exist among us." Ethan stepped forward. "Funny. I was thinking the same thing about you." Krazier's smirk faded. "You think your presence here changes anything? You are a stain on our traditions. A human, standing beside one of our warriors. It is an insult." Velray drew her weapon. "Enough, Krazier. Your time is over." Krazir's guards rushed into the room, surrounding them. Ethan clenched his fists, ready for a fight. Krazir grinned. "Let's see if you are as strong as they say." The battle was about to begin. Ethan's heart pounded as Krazir's warriors closed in. The dimly lit chamber filled with tension, the flickering torches casting long shadows on the walls. Velrai stood beside him, her grip firm on her weapon. Krazir smirked, his scared face showing amusement. "You think you can challenge me, human? You don't belong here." Ethan clenched his fists. "Funny. I was just about to say the same thing about you." Krazir's eyes darkened. "Enough talk. End them." His warriors lunged forward. The fight begins. Velrai moved first, swift as lightning. She ducked under an enemy's swing and struck with precision, her blade slicing through armor. Ethan dodged a strike, barely avoiding the sharp edge of a spear. He countered with a hard punch, sending one of Krazir's men sprawling. The chamber echoed with the sounds of battle, clashing weapons, grunts of effort, and the heavy thud of bodies hitting the ground. Ethan had no formal combat training, but he fought with instinct. He grabbed a fallen warrior's staff and swung it with all his strength, knocking an enemy off balance. Velrai spun in perfect rhythm, her movements refined from years of training. Together, they held their ground. But Krazir's warriors were relentless. More of them poured into the room, surrounding the pair. Velrai blocked an incoming strike and glanced at Ethan. "We need to get out of here." Ethan wiped blood from his lip. "Agreed. But how?" Before Velrai could answer, the ground trembled. A loud explosion rocked the fortress, sending dust and debris flying. From the tunnel behind them, Relic, the scout, appeared. "Move. Reinforcements are coming." Ethan didn't hesitate. He swung his staff again, creating an opening. "Let's go." Velrai kicked back an attacker and followed Ethan as they rushed toward the tunnel. Krazir's wrath. Krazir growled, his anger boiling over. He grabbed a nearby weapon, a massive war axe, and slammed it into the ground. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through the chamber, knocking over crates and shaking the walls. "You run like cowards," Krazir roared. "Face me." Ethan turned back, breathing heavily. He could see the rage in Krazir's eyes. The warrior was ready to kill. Velrai grabbed his arm. "Not yet. We fight on our terms." Ethan nodded. "Then let's get out of here." With Relic leading the way, they dashed through the tunnel as more explosions echoed behind them. The escape. The tunnel led them to a hidden exit near the fortress's outer walls. As they emerged into the night air, the city's skyline glowed in the distance. Relic looked back. That explosion was a distraction, but it won't hold them for long. Velrai wiped her blade clean. "We need to warn the council. Krazir is planning something bigger." Ethan exhaled, still catching his breath. "Yeah, and he won't stop until he gets what he wants." A deep voice interrupted them. "Then we make sure he doesn't." They turned to see a squad of Sci-Fi warriors approaching. At their head was a tall figure clad in ceremonial armor, the commander of the Capitol Guard. "We've been watching Krazir for some time," the commander said. "Your actions tonight proved his true nature. The council will hear of this." Velrai saluted. "Then we must move quickly." The commander nodded. "Agreed. But first, rest. You'll need your strength for what's coming." Ethan looked toward the fortress one last time. Krazir was still out there, and he wasn't done yet. But neither was Ethan. The city's great hall was packed with leaders, warriors, and council members. The air was tense, filled with whispered conversations and nervous glances. Velrai stood tall beside Ethan, her expression unreadable. They had risked everything to expose Krazir's plan, and now the council would decide what to do next. The commander of the Capitol Guard stepped forward. "The evidence is clear. Krazir has betrayed the Sci-Fi people. He seeks power, not honor." A murmur spread through the hall. Some nodded in agreement, while others hesitated. Krezir had powerful allies. Ethan scanned the room, sensing the uncertainty. He stepped forward, his voice firm. I know I'm an outsider, but I've seen what Krezir is willing to do. He attacked us. He would rather rule through fear than serve with honor. An elder council member leaned forward. And what do you propose, human? Ethan exhaled. Let me face him. One-on-one. A duel for honor. Gasps filled the hall. Velrai turned to him, eyes wide. Ethan, that's... He met her gaze. The only way. The commander nodded slowly. A challenge of honor cannot be ignored. If Krezir refuses, he proves his cowardice. A council member turned to a guard. Summon Krezir. The duel begins. Krezir arrived moments later, his heavy footsteps echoing through the hall. His gaze locked onto Ethan, amusement flickering in his eyes. A duel. Krezir chuckled. You must be desperate. Ethan stood firm. Or maybe you're just afraid. Krezir's smirk faded. Very well. I accept. The council members cleared the center of the hall, creating a makeshift arena. Velrai placed a hand on Ethan's arm. You don't have to do this. Ethan smiled. I do. For you. For all of us. Velrai hesitated, then nodded. Then fight well. The duel was simple. No weapons, no armor. Just strength and skill. Krezir wasted no time. He lunged, swinging a powerful fist toward Ethan's head. Ethan dodged, barely avoiding the strike. Krezir was fast, stronger than any human Ethan had fought before. But Ethan had one advantage. He was unpredictable. Krezir swung again, but Ethan ducked and countered with a sharp jab to the ribs. Krezir grunted, more annoyed than hurt. He grabbed Ethan's arm and threw him to the ground. Pain shot through Ethan's back, but he rolled away before Krezir could land another blow. He had to stay on his feet, keep moving. A hall erupted with cheers and shouts. Some supported Krezir, but many were starting to root for Ethan. The turning point. Ethan stood, breathing heavily. Krezir was bigger, stronger, but Ethan had something Krezir didn't. Strategy. Krezir charged again, but this time, Ethan didn't dodge. Instead, he stepped forward and used Krezir's own momentum against him. He twisted, sending the massive warrior stumbling. Velrai's voice rang out. Keep going, Ethan. Krezir growled and attacked wildly. Ethan ducked under a strike, then delivered a hard punch to Krezir's jaw. The impact sent the warrior staggering back. Ethan pressed the advantage. He landed another hit, then another. Krezir's confidence wavered. For the first time, he looked unsure. The crowd roared. Ethan saw his chance. He stepped in, using all his strength to drive his fist into Krezir's chest. The massive warrior gasped, falling to one knee. Silence filled the hall. Ethan took a deep breath. He could finish it. One last blow. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped back and spoke, his voice clear. You've lost. Krezir. Surrender. Krezir clenched his fists, his pride fighting against the truth. He looked at the council, then at the faces of his own warriors. They weren't cheering for him anymore. Slowly, he bowed his head. I yield. A new beginning. The council declared Ethan the victor. Krezir was stripped of his rank. His influence shattered. The Scifi people had seen his true nature. As the hall emptied, Velrai approached Ethan, her eyes shining. You won. Ethan chuckled. Barely. She smiled. You fought with honor. Ethan shrugged. I had a good reason. Velrai hesitated for a moment, then took his hand. Stay. Fight for more than just survival. Fight for something greater. Ethan looked around. The people, the future they could build. He squeezed her hand. I think I will. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he truly belonged. End of story.